This is no longer the grand old party that Paul Ryan signed up for. This Republican Party belongs to Donald Trump. During a speech to Congress this week, Trump challenged Republican orthodoxy on multiple fronts. And the question now, can the House Speaker find common ground, not with Democrats, but with his own president? Paul Singer of USA Today reports. Closer to home, Wisconsin faces a tidal wave of costly delays if it adopts Governor Walker's plan for roads, according to a new memo. We hear from Patrick Marley in Madison. And once again, there's a major problem with Milwaukee County's pension system. A 2014 report that is just now becoming public shows that hundreds of errors were made over many years in pension payments. Pulitzer Prize winner David Umhoefer discusses. All this and more from Wisconsin's best political team today on OnPolitics. Good afternoon. I'm David Haynes, opinions editor at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Welcome to OnPolitics for Thursday, March 2nd. Well, President Trump gave a speech this week, and it was a new kind of President Trump, kinder and gentler. We talked to Paul Singer of USA Today, but first, a clip from that speech with President Trump.
To launch our national rebuilding, I will be asking Congress to approve legislation that produces a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure of the United States, financed through both public and private capital, creating millions of new jobs. This effort will be guided by two core principles: Buy American and Hire American.
So Paul Singer of USA Today, the political editor in USA Today's Washington Bureau, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
You bet. So we just watched a clip of President Trump at the Tuesday speech before a joint session of Congress. And he mentioned that he'd like to have the nation do $1 trillion in infrastructure spending. Behind him was Paul Ryan, the House Speaker from Wisconsin, and he was standing and clapping. But I guess what I'm wondering is, will Ryan's caucus be clapping when that bill comes up from the White House?
No, probably not. In fact, part of the issue here is we're never really sure exactly what he's talking about. I mean, last night was the first time I heard him say that it would be $1 trillion in a public-private partnership. I don't know exactly what that means, and neither does anybody else. It's very much like the stimulus bill that Barack Obama offered and passed, in fact, in 2009, $878 billion, if I remember correctly, that Republicans were very, very concerned about because, of course, all that public spending means an awful lot of debt. The question is, what do you use to offset those costs? This is where Mr. Trump is going to get into trouble, is that he's got a bunch of these ideas that cost money. He's got a $1 trillion infrastructure plan. He's got possibly a $1 trillion tax reform plan. He's got hundreds of billions of dollars of increases in the border wall and in immigration enforcement. He wants $50 billion more for the Defense Department. At some point, you got to pay for all that with something.
Right.
And the only ideas that are floating around at the moment are sort of being reused over and over again. Oh, we'll use this border tax. Oh, we'll have the border tax. Well, the border tax will pay for that. Well, the border tax can't pay for all of it.
Right.
So where's it going to come from?
And where's it going to come from? And Ryan has quite a fiscally conservative caucus that he needs to satisfy. So Trump was sort of trotting on some other Republican orthodoxy, too, and he talked about trade agreements. He brought up NAFTA in particular, which he's done frequently. How's that going to play with the Republicans in both the House and Senate?
Well, it's weird. You know, the Republicans have sort of, at this point, coalesced behind Trump's anti-trade language, despite the fact that they were a pro-trade party 6 months ago. So it's just an odd thing. At the moment, Trump has withdrawn from the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement, which was still just a negotiation deal. It wasn't actually signed. No one has figured out what he's going to try to do for reopening NAFTA. And of course, the border tax is another interesting question because you could conceivably run afoul of the WTO, the World Trade Organization. So until somebody has a concrete proposal that they have to try and push through a Republican Congress, at the moment, I think everyone's going to stand around and say, yeah, we're in favor of fair trade, not free trade.
Right.
But we'll see.
Right. Okay, so finally, Paul, the tone of this speech, very different than what we're used to hearing from President Trump. It was a kinder and gentler Donald Trump. Are we going to hear 1,000 points of light sometime soon?
I would, yeah, that would be astounding. It was definitely the reach for the stars version. We can walk on the moon again. We can solve cancer. It was really the visions of our dreams of our hearts are the things that should drive our vision. But if you look into the guts of the speech, it was still immigrants are bad and illegal immigrants are really bad, and people are victims of immigrant crime and need to be highlighted, and we need law enforcement, and we don't particularly like being active in the world, and we're suspicious of foreign interactions. I mean, that is not as sunny a speech, but it is true. He gave a very presidential presentation, and he focused much more on the things, the dreams and the things he wants to achieve than the fears that I think have driven a lot of his campaign rhetoric.
Paul Singer of USA Today, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now I'm joined in studio in Milwaukee by Mary Spicuzza, reporter for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and Dan Bice, columnist for the Journal-Sentinel. Mary, let me go to you first. I want to turn to coming out of Paul Singer's comments. I want to turn to the news today about Jeff Sessions. The Washington Post reported overnight that Sessions had in fact talked to the Russians on at least 2 occasions before Trump was elected. So what does this mean? He said during his confirmation hearing that he hadn't talked to the Russians. So what do you think this means?
Yeah, he was asked about it twice, I think once during his hearing, once in writing afterwards, and both times said that he had not had contact with them. He is now saying that that was about the campaign, that these contacts were not about the Trump campaign, that it was in his official capacity as a chairman of a committee or a member of a committee, and basically saying, I didn't lie, I don't see what the problem is.
So he's essentially saying, they didn't ask me the right question.
Right, exactly. However, I think that it could be argued that if you had contact with Russians and people are asking you if you had contact with Russians, the best answer would be yes, but rather than no.
Yes.
So Dan, how are Republicans reacting to this so far?
Well, and the Democrats. I mean, the reaction by the Republicans is try to contain it. At first, try to say that this was insignificant and that the Democrats are trying to split hairs, but now you have the Republicans saying he should not be part of any sort of investigation into the Russian contacts. On the other hand, the Democrats are push. They want to get as much out of this as they can. They would like to see him. Some people have said that they would like him to resign, and others want a special counsel to conduct the investigation in this case.
Well, and obviously, we just had Flynn resigning recently for contacts with the Russians. Obviously, that was a little different because he was talking about sanctions and denied that he was talking about sanctions. But it is kind of a similar where somebody's asking you a direct question and you basically split hairs and mislead.
Well, this isn't going to go away. The Democrats are still very aggrieved about the election, for one thing.
And it's one of those things that he's on video saying no, that he didn't have contact. So that makes it a whole lot more difficult. Yeah. So the strategy for the Trump people will be, can they contain this and have an investigation by the Justice Department and create a firewall for him, or in the case of last resort, have him resign.
And President Trump was obviously getting some good headlines after his speech, and this really kind of steps on that positive news cycle for him. So I can't imagine he is super happy about it. Besides, who wants to be the president that Vladimir Putin helped elect? He doesn't like this storyline.
But this story is going to continue through the weekend, I think, and instead of a focus on the speech by the president, this is now the focus of what's going on in Washington.
Right, and they were doing a victory tour. Mike Pence, in fact, is scheduled to come to Wisconsin, Janesville, I think, tomorrow.
Right.
And so, that's bad messaging at this point.
Well, but I don't think they were expecting this.
Right. Well, let's turn now to a story closer to home. Some news this morning. County Executive Chris Abele was in our office, talked to David Umhafer, and I just spoke to Dave Umhafer about that conversation. So now I'm joined by Dave Umhafer of the Journal-Sentinel. Dave, you just met with County Executive Chris Abele about this pension problem. In a nutshell, a report that came out in 2014 just made public, and you can talk about why it was just made public, shows that there may have been hundreds of errors, not just the one that we heard about last week. So what's going on here? What's the news from that meeting with Chris Abele?
Right, there was a bombshell in this meeting. The county executive says that he did not learn of this 2014 report until January of 2017, just a few weeks ago. So that was news, big news. He's saying that the pension board took action. He was not made aware of it, that he didn't have a copy. He didn't know the extent of the problem. He still doesn't know which pensioners are involved. They don't know the costs. So there's a lot of sudden activity around this.
So what are the lines of communication here? Why would the county executive not know about a report that is this inflammatory?
This is something he's criticizing how the lines of authority work. There's a pension board. The pension director, who just got fired by the county exec, reports not only to the county exec but to this pension board. The pension board did not act in public on this report being filed with IRS. They never discussed it in public. It was never on any agenda. So he's saying essentially that he was let down by the process and by his own appointees who work on these pension issues.
I might mention that Don Boehm, who covers the county, and Ernie Franzen on the editorial board were also in that meeting.
Correct.
Don, in fact, I think wrote the first story on this. So is Abele saying that they hid it from him, or they just chose not to make it public?
He's investigating. He wants an investigation internally into what happened, but he's also talking about a much larger audit of what went into all these errors. Are they even accurate? What the cost to the taxpayers is going to be? And he's saying it is time now to look at whether we need to blow up the way that office is structured. Should the county pension be part of the state pension system? So this is going to be an ongoing issue for months and months.
Right. And when he was in recently to talk about it, it was one person,
right,
a widow of a county employee who I think got $140,000 more than she was due. But now, bring us up to date.
So yeah, publicly this looked like one case, pretty surprising amount of money, but just confined to that, and of course he lets his pension director go. Now we're learning that obviously there were other reasons why he let her go in his mind, and we take it from there and see where this goes and what else he's going to learn along the way. He's saying that essentially we know almost as much as he does at this point about the situation.
But isn't it possible there's hundreds of errors?
Oh yeah, there's nearly 1,000 errors that were reported in this document to the IRS. It was filed almost 3 years ago, but it's not clear what happened after that. Did anything happen? Did they attempt to estimate the costs? As recently as a couple weeks ago, the pension director, when she was still on the job, was saying, we're still compiling the costs of this. Well, why is that happening 3 years later? So many questions.
A lot more to learn there. Dave Umhafer from the Journal-Sentinel will be following his reports and Don Boehm's reports on the pension issue in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
So, Dan, you just heard Dave, and I think you were in that meeting too, discuss what Chris Abele said this morning. What do you make of this?
That it's a big issue, and he's stated his position on it, which is that it's the pension board and the pension staff's fault, and that he was unaware of it. The question now is that a true story? And then secondly, how big a story is this? I think, this is just now coming to light. So there are a number of questions, as Dave said, and we have to see with the county executive, when did he know this? The important question to me is, did he know this before last year's election and hold off not going public with it? Or is it, as he said in the meeting, something that he discovered, he said, late December or early January? And also, what's he done since he found this out in early January? They decided to go public with this with the firing of the pension director just last week, but obviously a lot's been going on behind the scenes.
We thought it was odd that he wanted an editorial board meeting to come in to talk about one mix-up over one person.
Obviously, that one was significant.
It was.
But, you know, it's not just the depth of that, but the breadth of the number of mistakes.
So to both of you, is it plausible that, given the way the county operates, that the county executive would know about the report?
I think that's the sort of question that we don't know the answer to right now. You don't want to jump ahead and say, yes, he did, or no, he didn't, until you've actually done the reporting on that, because there are a number of open records requests out there, a number of requests for emails, and I'm sure we'll find out. But whatever the answer is, we find out a lot about Chris Abley's management style. I mean, he's in. It doesn't portray him well. Whatever we do find out, whether he's disengaged and knows nothing about this, or he is engaged and now he's not telling the truth about it, either option is not a good one for him.
Or is it possible that the county is just a big enough animal that if you have sort of a hands-off or more a laissez-faire kind of management style, you might not know about something like that?
I would assume maybe if there were people who should have been telling him who didn't tell him, that there might be more firings along the way. And that might give us an indication of what was happening.
But clearly he's responsible for who the pension director is, because he just removed the pension director. So it
accepted her resignation. But
right.
Yeah.
But again, it says something about his management style as to who he puts in these positions. If you are going to have a laissez-faire management style, you need to have aggressive and competent people under you.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to another management issue, that is of the state road fund. And Governor Walker has a plan out there that is coming under some criticism from members of his own party. So let's go to Patrick Marley, who talked about that. So Patrick, welcome.
Thanks.
A lead of your story the other day, I'm just going to read it. Governor Scott Walker's transportation plans would result in more congestion, deteriorating road conditions, and decades of delayed projects. Reviews by his own administration show, and I quote, "The tidal wave is coming as this critical work can't be delayed forever," the January memo shows. So what's the importance of this memo, Patrick?
Well, I think it shows that, Governor Walker has said he doesn't want to raise the gas tax. He's committed to sort of a more constrained approach to transportation over the next 2 years. And what the memo shows, which past documents have also revealed, is that, it's taken out over a long period of time. This is going to have pretty big impact on the roads in Wisconsin. It's going to mean more projects are going to be delayed. It's going to take longer time. And one thing that we find out in that memo is that, they'll have to do temporary repairs. If you put off rebuilding the east-west in Milwaukee, for instance, we have to do temporary repairs that would then be thrown out when you actually do the project.
And there's still a split within the party, right, between Republicans who are more open to even tax increases.
That's right. There's some in the Assembly who say that, certainly the Assembly says they want $300 million more for roads over the next 2 years. That could be a gas tax increase of 4.5 cents or more per gallon if it was done through a gas tax. They haven't said how they want to get that money, so it's possible they would try to transfer it from somewhere else or use registration fees to get the money. But Walker, on the other hand, has been very steadfast in opposing raising the gas tax. He's left open a window of opportunity for Republicans, possibly, but he's been very resistant to the idea of raising the gas tax.
And the new DOT director, David Ross, apparently is looking for ways to economize. What kinds of things is he looking to do potentially?
Well, they haven't given us specifics, but the governor said yesterday that he thinks that traffic projections might be off, that people won't be driving as much in the future as we have expected, because of driverless cars and changes in technology, changes in work habits. And so he's asked the Department of Transportation to reevaluate what it expects for the future. So that might mean if you rebuild a highway or you build a new highway, instead of having 4 lanes on it, you'd have 3 lanes on it, or 2 lanes instead of 3. You could save some money there, obviously, but road projects are very expensive, as you know. Some projects in the Milwaukee area are $1 billion. So, 10% savings or a 20% savings is big. That's $100 or $200 million, but you still have $800 million you'd have to pay for the project.
So what kind of pressure is coming from the road builders? That organization has been a huge contributor to Republican politicians for many years in the state. What are they saying, and what kind of a pressure are they applying behind the scenes?
Well, they've been big supporters of Governor Walker in the past, and I think they're a little frustrated with where things stand now because Walker has, who in years past talked about the importance of infrastructure investment, seems to be backing off now when the funding situation is as bad as it is. So they're frustrated. They're going to be lobbying hard. Yeah, they're a powerful interest in this debate. Absolutely.
All right, Patrick, Marley, and Madison, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's that time again. You've wasted 25 minutes.
Our favorite
time. And now for the highlight of the show, winners and losers. Dan, who's your winner this week?
So Wisconsin company got mentioned in the president's speech, Harley-Davidson, which you might remember that he was supposed to come here, give a talk, and it sort of fell apart, and that didn't happen. But he then used them, praised them as a company, said he didn't want to ride their bikes despite their offer, putting on the lawn and stuff. But he talked mainly about the trade issue and how what sort of tariffs get imposed on Harley-Davidson when they sell overseas. But there was an interesting follow-up today in the Wall Street Journal pointing out that actually their overseas sales are really good. Right now, about 38% of their volume comes from overseas sales, and they just recently came up with a goal of increasing that to 50%, which just a few years back it was around 20%.
Yeah.
So actually they're doing pretty well.
So the growth is overseas right now.
So actually it was an example that the president tried to use to support his trade policies, but maybe it's not the best example.
Well, who's your loser?
Sue Black, former Parks Director, State Parks Director, and County Parks Director. She was the Parks Director under Tommy Thompson, Governor Walker, and Chris Abele, and now she's in Arizona making $160,000 a year, and she's been accused of workplace harassment and a number of other things, having a staffer do personal work on work time and any number of other things, and this is I think the third complaint filed against her. So, and she had problems here. Tommy Thompson loved her, but Scott Walker started off liking her, but had some issues and actually had her draft a resignation letter that he could use at any time. And then Chris Abele loved her, was very good friends with her, hired her as park director, gave her a huge pay raise, and then dismissed her without explanation.
Mary, let me turn to you. Who's your loser?
Okay. Jeff Sessions, I would say. It's obviously not a good week for him. I don't think
last 24 hours in particular.
Particularly, yeah. I think the first story broke, yesterday afternoon, late yesterday afternoon.
Late in the evening, yeah.
So, yeah, I think that you don't want to be in a position where you're trying to insist that you did not lie to Congress, and that is not a good spot to be in, whatever happens, whether he has to recuse himself from the Russia investigation. Obviously Dems are calling for him to resign. That wouldn't be totally unprecedented given the Flynn resignation, but not a good 24-hour stretch for him.
Not a good 24-hour stretch indeed. So who's your winner?
Okay, so this is actually going to be a bipartisan group of lawmakers who visited the JCC in Whitefish Bay this week, which has been targeted by 2 bomb threats, part of this massive wave across the country of Jewish centers and schools being targeted. So it was an interesting mix. It was Tammy Baldwin and Glenn Grothman and Alberta Darling and Gwen Moore and Tom Barrett. I can't remember the last time I saw all of them in a room together. But they basically, it's been a while, but I think that they sent a pretty clear message that whether they're Democrats or Republicans, that anti-Semitism and threatening an entire community is unacceptable and will be prosecuted.
Well, in fact, the president sent a very similar message, leading his speech off by condemning those threats.
Right, and he had been criticized in the past for really not not speaking out and being asked. There was the Orthodox Jewish reporter who asked him about the threats, and he ended up getting pretty confrontational with the guy and telling him to sit down. And people were saying, like, what is taking so long? Why can't you say this? So I think there was a lot of pressure on him, but I do think he sent a clear message that this is unacceptable.
All right, let's go to questions. We've got several. So let me give the first one to you, Dan. During Trump's speech, why wouldn't all the Democrats stand for the majority of the things he says he wants to do? Some of the Democrats seem to only stand when Trump talked about gun violence and illegal immigrants shooting police officers. So what's the protocol for standing and not standing at these speeches?
I don't think that there's a specific protocol, but the way it's been done and generally been done is that the party of the president applauds almost everything he says, whereas the other party occasionally stands up, like you would see Senator Joe Manchin stand up from West Virginia, stand up and applaud when they mentioned the coal industry. But it was also odd to see some of the Republicans stand up for everything. I thought it was a little bit awkward to see Paul Ryan standing up and applauding.
For infrastructure spending of $1 trillion.
And paid family leave, something he's opposed forever.
Yeah.
So
Right.
on both of those things, you see him standing and applauding. So, I mean, it is a little unusual and odd to see about half the room sitting there and not doing anything. This is the way it's always been
Well,
done.
and the other thing that happened were the Democratic women in Congress all were
Dressed up
white
in white, right.
as a protest.
There have been other instances. Remember the liar shouts at Obama and things where
Joe
kind
Wilson.
of crosses this. I didn't feel like
we didn't have that.
We didn't have that.
But
So
again,
progress.
I mean, this is a room full of politicians, so you don't expect perfect protocol on behalf of everybody. So.
That we'd be out of a job if they did do that. So, next to you, Mary, will Scott Walker be successful in either pressuring or persuading Tammy Baldwin to vote for President Trump's Supreme Court pick, Neil Gorsuch? This is kind of an easy one.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be a no. I think that, it's funny because now Republicans are saying Democrats are being obstructionist and standing in the way, where obviously for months we saw Democrats saying the same of Republicans when President Obama tried to nominate somebody with, 8-9 months left to his term. So I don't know how much success he will have. I'm going to say probably not much.
Well, they've already gotten into a Twitter war over
Right,
this. So,
yes.
I don't think...
It's already gotten ugly on Twitter, so I don't know that that's going to...
And I don't
And
know
we
if
know what
Scott
happens when
Walker
that happens.
is the person she listens to when deciding how to vote on matters in Congress.
Probably not. So, Dan, one more question. Is there anything remaining in the state's campaign finance law that would prevent a foreign government from anonymously donating to a candidate?
The law still remains that you can't do that. The question is, would we know about it? And if it happened and we knew about it, you could certainly prosecute something like that. But it is harder and harder. I mean, I was just looking at the reports the other day, and it is very frustrating because you can't actually even see what company people work for anymore, which is a debate we had with Robin Voss. And so someone like Ted Kellner, who's a powerful and influential figure in this community, his job is listed as analyst on one of these things, which sounds like just a regular job for anybody.
Right.
But he's, Ted Kellner's much more than an analyst.
He's something more than an analyst.
So
one of the biggest money managers in the state.
I do think it's very, very unfortunate that we have less today, but it hasn't reached the point that foreign governments can come in and buy candidates if they want to.
Okay, well, that's a wrap for this edition of On Politics. Dan, Mary, thanks for being here. Also, thanks to Patrick Marley, Dave Umhafer, and special thanks to our correspondent from USA Today. Thanks so much.